Attention all you rule breakers, you misfits and troublemakers, all you free spirits and pioneers, all you visionaries and nonconformists. Everything the establishment has told you is wrong with you is actually what's right with you. You see things others don't. You are hardwired to change the world.
Welcome once again to the Spiritual Activist Radio Show here on BBS Radio. We'd like to also remind you that the Spiritual Activist Radio Show is a non-profit endeavor. It's a community-supported radio show, and if you'd like to make a tax-deductible donation, you can visit www.spiritualactivist.com, and we appreciate your support. Today we're going to be interviewing Joe Dispenza. This is my second interview with him. Many years ago, right after he was in What the Bleep Do We Know, my wife Dara and I, we interviewed him up in Mount Shasta. That was an interesting interview, but he's come a long way. His journey has not stopped. He's a researcher, and he's been doing some really good research into the mind and how the mind can affect our reality, and we can actually become creators and co-creators of our lives. So I'm going to ask him some questions that, well, I think we're going to go down the rabbit hole a little bit, but he seemed really comfortable with some of my questions about the holographic principle, the holographic universe, and the fact that we might be simulations, because this has come up several times with people like Bruce Lipton, Thomas Campbell, and as we get deeper into our reality, we're going to start seeing that consciousness comes first, not matter. And this is the big transition in science right now. So I'm going to start out by asking Joe about his journey and about what does it exactly mean to be supernatural. And he's been giving some really nice workshops with hundreds of people, so he has a mountain of data to back up his research and base his findings on. So hello, Joe Dispenza. How are you doing today? And I'm going to start this off by explain to us a little bit how this journey has been for you and exactly what do you mean by supernatural?
When we started out on this journey, I had no idea that we would be seeing the measurements and recording some of the findings that we've been recording over the last few years. And I can tell you right now, without a doubt, that common people are doing the uncommon. They're healing themselves from very serious health conditions, from cancer to diabetes, to lupus, to rheumatoid arthritis, to Hashimoto syndrome, to anxiety, to depression, to OCD. They are creating new jobs, new opportunities, new careers, new relationships. They're healing from childhood scars and wounds that were emotionally blocking them from living a happy life. And they're having mystical experiences that transcend language. And to me, that's pretty supernatural. Now, when it happens once, you can call that a fluke or an incident. When it happens twice, all of a sudden it becomes a coincidence. But if it's happening 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 times, now you're looking at a trend. And anything that's repeatable, in my mind, is science. So now we've got enough data to prove to people that they have within their reach all the biological and neurological machinery to begin to empower themselves in their lives. Now, most people wait for something outside of them, some experience or some event, to change how they feel inside of them. They're waiting for that new job, that new relationship, the relief from their lack or their pain. And if it never comes around, for the most part, they live their entire life striving and forcing and trying to control outcomes. But when you begin to realize that you have the ability to change how you think and feel and change your inner states, and if you do that repeatedly, changing your inner state should begin to produce an effect in your outer world. Now, the good news about that is that makes us less of a victim in our lives and more of a creator of our lives. And I think that's the most important message. And you don't have to be a monk or a priest or a rabbi. You don't have to be an academic or a scholar. That common people are doing the uncommon, and it's happening more and more.
Okay, there's a few questions here I really want to ask you. I've been getting into the fact, I think when we get to be about our age, sometimes we get tired of being ourselves and we start experimenting with being somebody else. And I've been listening to Jim Carey lately, and some of his acting experiences has forced him so heavily to be somebody else. It's made him realize that we are not our thoughts. We are not a lot of who we think we are. And in your book, you talk about becoming someone else. And a friend of mine sent me this question. She'd like to know, what do we do at that point? Once we realize we're somebody else, what next?
Well, first of all, I've had that conversation with Jim Carey on a personal level, and it's a very interesting concept because when we reach a point in our lives where we can predict the feeling of every experience in our life, that means that nothing new is going to happen, because feelings and emotions, for the most part, are chemical residues or feedback from past experiences. So if we can predict the feeling of everything that's going to happen in our life, it means nothing new is happening in our life. So then nothing begins to take away the feelings that we live by. And I think this is when the soul begins to nudge us and begin to force us to wake up and to begin to ask bigger questions like, who am I? Why am I here? What's my purpose in life? What happens when I die? Do I really exist beyond death? People start asking bigger questions. Is there more? And so the model that we use is very simple. Your personality creates your personal reality. That's it. And your personality is made up of how you think, how you act, and how you feel. So the present personality who's listening to this show has created their present personal reality called their life. Well, that makes sense. So then if you wanted to create a new personal reality, a new life, you would have to change your personality, which means then the first step is you'd have to start thinking about what you've been thinking about and change it. You have to become aware of your unconscious habits and behaviors and modify them. And you have to look at certain emotions that keep you anchored to the past and decide, do these emotions belong in my future? And I think that most people try to create a new personal reality, a new life, as the same personality, and it doesn't work. We literally have to become someone else. So then we think 60 to 70,000 thoughts in one day, and 90% of those thoughts are the same thoughts as the day before. So the same thoughts lead to the same choices lead to the same behaviors create the same experiences produce the same emotions, those same emotions influence our very same thoughts, and our biology, our neurocircuitry, our neurochemistry, our hormones, and even our genes stay the same because nothing is changing. So then the principle in neuroscience says that nerve cells that fire together wire together. If you keep thinking the same way and making the same choices and doing the same things and creating the same experiences that stamp the same networks of neurons into the same patterns to reaffirm the same familiar feeling called you, firing and wiring that for years on end begins to hardwire the brain into a very finite signature. That finite signature becomes our identity, and by the time we're 35 years old, we become a set of memorized behaviors, emotional reactions, automatic habits, beliefs and perceptions, and hardwired attitudes that function just like a computer program. You hit play and it runs. So most people then are on autopilot, and their body is dragging them into a predictable future based on what they did in the past. So then as you begin to become conscious of your unconscious thoughts, you begin to pay attention to your habits and behaviors, and you begin to look at those emotions, then all of a sudden the act of observing them says that you're no longer the program. You're the consciousness observing the program. In other words, who's doing the observing of your thoughts? That's who you really are, pure consciousness. But when you're unconscious, then you're immersed in the biology of the program. So then as you begin to objectify your objective self, you begin to pull out of the biology of your programs. That's the first step in order to change. So then most people love to wait for crisis or trauma or disease or diagnosis or betrayal or loss to finally make up their mind to change. And my message is, why wait? You can learn and change in a state of pain and suffering, or you can learn and change in a state of joy and inspiration. And most people now are beginning to wake up, and they want to wake up being defined by a vision of the future, who they really want to be, instead of the memories of the past. They want to believe in their future more than they want to believe in their past. They want to fall in love with a new future more than they want to keep falling in love with their past. And that process of beginning to change your state, if you keep doing it every single day, everything begins to change. Your biology, your neurocircuitry, your chemistry, your hormones, and your genes. We've measured that. And it could happen in a matter of just a few days. And that then gives people the freedom then to say that when they start seeing synchronicities and coincidences and serendipities and uncommon events start occurring in their life that are equal to their intentions, now they're getting feedback from the universe that they're beginning to change. Now, that feedback is important because the joy and the surprise and the excitement from that feedback should inspire them to create again. And that's how we begin to make changes in our lives.
Yeah, it seems like we just have to be willing to get out of our comfort zone. Because I've noticed the same thing in a dream state. There's been a couple of times when I was having a dream, and in the dream, I'm the dreamer. The dream is reality, everything. But then that little thought came in that something isn't quite right here. And I thought, wow, I am dreaming. And even though I didn't wake up, just the thought of knowing I was asleep took me to a whole nother level of comprehension of my situation. And the same thing happens in this life. People don't put enough value when they say, I'm asleep, I must wake up. And they think they have a long ways to go, but that's a huge step to lucid living, I guess you would say.
Sure. I mean, what if this is the dream?
Yeah.
What if this is the dream that we're caught in and you got to wake up? So it's really interesting because I think that's a great observation because, going from the old self to the new self, going from who we remember ourselves to be into a new state of being, the hardest part about change is not making the same choice as we do the day before. And the moment we decide to make a different choice or do something differently, you got to get ready because it's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be unfamiliar. There's going to be some uncertainty. It's going to be unpredictable because you're leaving the known territory. And if you wake up every morning and you're thinking about your problems, and your brain is a record of the past, as you think about those problems connected to certain people and certain things at certain times and places, you're activating circuits from the past. And if those memories create emotions of unhappiness and sadness and pain, then the body begins to believe it's in the past. And if those emotions are driving your thoughts, and how you think and how you feel creates a state of being, most people's entire state of being is in the past. And if they keep thinking and feeling and feeling and thinking over time, they condition their body to become the mind of that emotion. Now, the body is living in the past. And so when we step into the unknown, the body starts sending signals back to the brain and it starts saying, why don't you start tomorrow? This is too hard. You can't do this. You're too much like your mother. It's your ex-wife's fault. It's taking too long. That's the thoughts that begin to influence us, and that's the body influencing the mind. Now, if we respond to those thoughts as if they're true, that thought will lead to the same choice, which will lead to the same behavior, which will create the same experience, which will produce the same emotion. The person says, this feels right. No. That feels familiar. Going from the old self to the new self is the neurological, the biological, the chemical, the hormonal, genetic death of the old self. And most people will say, I can't predict my future because I'm in that unknown, I'm in that void. Well, the best way to predict your future is to create it. So then what thoughts do you want to fire and wire in your brain? What behaviors do you want to demonstrate in one day? The act of closing your eyes and rehearsing those behaviors begins to install the neurological hardware in your brain. Now the brain's no longer a record of the past. Now it's a map to the future. And as you keep repeating it day after day, that hardware will become a software program. And you may start thinking like an abundant person. You may start acting like a happy person because there's no mystery. You install the circuits. And then the last part is, of course, can you teach your body emotionally what that future is going to feel like? That means you can't wait for your wealth to feel abundance or your healing to feel wholeness or your new relationship to feel love. That's waiting for something outside of you to change how you feel inside of you. That's Newtonian model of reality. The quantum model of reality says the moment you start feeling whole, your healing begins. The moment you're in love with yourself and you're in love with life, you'll magnetize or create an equal. The moment you're generating worthiness and abundance, you'll begin to create wealth. And now that's causing an effect. So then I think that we already know how to do this. I think we're wired to do this. I just think that we spend so much of our time in our lives living unconsciously that we need a wake-up call. And that wake-up call sometimes is tragedy. Sometimes it's diagnosis. Sometimes it's loss. Now, that's the old model, but if that's what it takes for people to wake up from the dream, then so be it. I mean, that's what it takes.
Sounds like the voice of experience there.
A few times, yes.
A few times. So listen, I know we're on a little bit of a time schedule here, and I'm going to grab you and me, and we're going to go down the rabbit hole just a little bit here. I was talking to Bruce Lipton. I was talking to Bruce Lipton, and he says, hey, you have to watch this interview I did with Tom Campbell. I watched it, and it got me thinking, because I've had this conversation somewhat with Roland McCready and Howard Martin. The question is a little bit complex. I'm just going to read it. It's easier. The process on the quantum level in the brain, especially concerning the process involving the synapse tubules, looks very similar to the holographic process. I have to ask this, Joe. If we are simulations of some type, like a lot of researchers are leaning towards, what are your thoughts as far as sending information back up the data stream to change the total collective holographic mind? And is this what happens in the meditation process? And the reason I'm asking this is because I can do the work on myself, and it would be nice to know that that work is not only on myself, but through the meditation. Do you think I'm connecting with that data stream, going back up into the holographic projection to make changes?
Well, I don't think it, I know it, because our measurements actually show that it's possible. Now, let's build a model so it makes sense for the listeners. When you live in stress, you live in survival. And when you perceive some threat or some unpredictable thing in your outer world or some danger, or you lose control, or you have the perception that something's going to get worse, you turn on a primitive nervous system called the fight or flight nervous system. And that sympathetic nervous system draws from this invisible field of energy and information that's surrounding your body. We tap that resource of energy and we turn it into chemistry. And when we do that, the field around our body shrinks. Now, for the short term, if you're being chased by Mr. Big or Tyrannosaurus Rex, that's very adaptive because you got to use all your body's resources in order to survive. But what if it isn't Tyrannosaurus Rex? What if it's your coworker, or it's morning traffic, or it's the news every single day? All of a sudden, what was once adaptive becomes very maladaptive. Because when you turn on that stress response and you can't turn it off, you're tapping the body's vital resources, and over again, you begin to shrink that field. Now, when you do that, you become more matter and less energy, more particle and less wave. And the very chemicals of stress causes our senses to become heightened. We become materialists and we narrow our focus on the danger, which is usually matter. So now we're focusing on the particle in quantum physics, and we're omitting the wave, energy, and information. Now that wave, that energy, you can't perceive with your senses. Your senses plug you into this three-dimensional reality, and the senses allow us to navigate in this three-dimensional world. So then people get stuck in this pattern where they keep focusing on matter, and there's more energy and information in the field than there is matter. So now they put all their attention on their bodies, because if you're aroused by the hormones of stress and you're being chased, you better put your attention on your body. When you're in danger, you put your attention on the cause of the danger. Is it a person? Is it a body? Is it a thing? Where do I need to go to a certain place? So all of our attention now is on the environment, and we're very, very obsessed about time. We're preoccupied with time. So when you put your attention on the body, the environment, and time, you're enslaved to the laws of Newtonian physics, which says that everything that you create as matter is going to take time, because you're going to have to drag your body through space. And when you do, that's how you experience time. So then there's me here and there's you there. And the more I'm living by the hormones of stress and my senses are heightened, then I experience separation. You're there and I'm here, and there's separation between the two of us. And that's how we densify or slow our frequency down into matter. So then the person is preoccupied with being a somebody, a someone, owning something, living somewhere, being in some time. Now, nothing wrong with that. It's just that if you're going to buy the house, if you're going to get your dreams to come true, it's just going to take you 30 years to make it happen, because you're going to have to work really hard to get it. That's matter to matter, creating reality. Now, our research shows that when you go from a narrow focus, when you take your attention off of matter, off your body, off of people, off of things, off of places, and off of time, and you begin to focus on nothing. You begin to open your focus, go from a divergent focus to a convergent focus, and you begin to open your awareness to energy and information. Something amazing happens. It's like you have a nose, but if you're not paying attention to your nose, it doesn't exist. But the moment you put your attention on your nose, it exists. It's always been there. It's just that you haven't been paying attention to it. Well, the field is the same way. How much of most people's waking day do they put their attention on energy and information? Very small percentage. Most of their attention is on matter. So then in the meditative process, we teach our students how to begin to go to that open state and tune into energy and information. Now, the quantum field is an invisible field of energy and information that exists beyond space and time. There's no people, there's no things, there's no objects, there's no places, there isn't even time. It's one infinite field of nothing material or physical, but what's filled with energy and information. And you can experience it with your senses. You can't see it. And just because you can't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. You can only experience it with your awareness. So then we teach people to become nobody, no one, no thing, nowhere, and no time. And if they do that properly, they become pure consciousness. And that's when their consciousness begins to connect to that holographic field of information. Now, we see what happens in the brain and the heart. Brain waves slow down. They move into more coherent, organized patterns, and they start to synchronize. And what syncs in the brain starts to link in the brain. So now energy is beginning to influence biology and matter. And when the brain starts getting more coherent, the front of the brain's talking to the back of the brain, the right side's talking to the left side, and all of a sudden you see this psychic union taking place. And when you see the union of two hemispheres coming together, the union of polarity, the union of duality, the union of opposites is called wholeness and love. At the exact same time that happens, the heart begins to become very organized and coherent as well. The biology is getting an upgrade. In other words, once the heart starts beating in resonance, and Heart Math Institute has proved this, the heart begins to produce a measurable magnetic field. That field can be up to 2 to 3 meters wide. That means now a person is more energy and less matter. This is our connection to the unified field. As the heart starts to beat in resonance, that frequency that's created like banging a drum carries information. And as you begin to lay an intent or a thought onto that frequency, you begin to broadcast new information into the field. So as brainwaves begin to change and people start connecting to that unified field, the unified field governs all the laws of nature, which means it's an invisible force that's self-organizing, that's keeping matter and everything into form. So then, as you begin to connect to that field, you'll go from a somebody to nobody to everybody, from someone to no one to everyone, from something to nothing to everything, from sometime to no time to every time, from somewhere to nowhere to everywhere. And all of a sudden, when that occurs, wow, all of a sudden that person hooks up to that frequency, and that frequency is carrying information, and now they're receiving information, and the brain goes into this super high energetic state called high gamma brainwave patterns. We've measured this. And the arousal that's created in the brain is not coming from that predator that's chasing them. The arousal that's coming is coming from inside the body back up into the brain. And now the person is downloading information, And that energy then is carrying a message, and latent systems in the brain start producing holographic images. The pineal gland begins to turn on and release these metabolites of melatonin, and the person goes lucid. And that inner experience is more real than any past external experience. And since experience enriches the brain, and it does, and experience produces an emotion, in 1 second they get a biological upgrade. Now, what's the side effect of that? The side effect is instantaneous healing, a mystical experience, a reorganization of circuitry and genes, and all of a sudden the person is almost like they're born again. That information then is then released into the memory storage of the database of the holographic field. Now, why is that important? Because if you have 750 people in the room, or 1,000 people in the room, and everybody is striving for that, once one person starts creating that field, other people can have access to that information. And it's like a 4-minute mile. Now we've pierced the veil, and then the next person does it. And now we have enough data to show that there's a pattern, that the energy of the room starts going up, the energy around people's bodies start to become more expanded. Your energy field coherently begins to mix with my energy field. Those two fields come together, they create a bigger amplitude. The higher the amplitude, the higher the energy. And all of a sudden the energy in the room goes up. Now there's energy to heal. Now there's energy to create a mystical experience. And everybody starts feeding off that database. And that's how we begin to evolve a species.
This is why information like this is so important, Joe, because a lot of people don't understand heart rate variability and the importance of coherence. But I see coherence as, that precarious balance you get when you're learning to ride a bicycle. It's sort of, as soon as you go into your body-mind development and trigger that, you're not all of a sudden you're not pulling to the left, pulling to the right. Balance just sort of happens, and it brings you up to another level of mind. And I think that's what we're seeking now by the things you're talking about, because now we're seeking another level of coherence or balance in a spiritual body-mind level.
Exactly. And so then when that person has that feeling, they no longer feel separate from anyone or anything. They feel connected to their dreams. They feel so whole. And we've interviewed them. They feel so much gratitude. They feel so complete that it's impossible for them to want. How can you want when you're whole? You feel like you already have everything. And now you're no longer in lack or separation. And that's when the magic starts happening in people's lives. That's when they start seeing these amazing doors open for them. And you can't tell me now, you're too old for this. You can't tell me you're too sick for this. You can't tell me you're in too much pain. You can't tell me that you had too much of a turbulent past, or that you're out of shape. You can't tell me you're too this or too that. I've seen it on every shape, every age, every skin color, every diet, every sexual preference. It doesn't matter. It's just that when we start experiencing that type of connection, then all of a sudden we tend to be more altruistic. We tend to be more giving. We tend to be more caring. We tend to be more loving. We tend to consider the whole. We tend to be more cooperative and collaborative, because we're no longer living in a selfish state in survival. We're living in a state where we feel connected to something greater. And we would never try to force outcomes and control outcomes when we're in that state, because we feel like we already have everything we want. And that place of creation, that nodal point, is the balancing act on the bike. Now, some people, when we measure their oxytocin levels and their neurotransmitters levels after they hit this point, their oxytocin levels, which is the love chemical, is over 200 times normal. They're not just saying I'm in love with life. They're saying I'm really in love with life. And the research on oxytocin says that when you feel that level of oxytocin, just the smallest measurement elevated, you can't hold a grudge. You can't, it's natural for you to forgive. And why would you want to trade this feeling for anyone or everything and anything? And I think that's a natural state of being. So there's community that's being created. And this is the importance of information, because I believe that in an age of information, ignorance is a choice. We don't need a priest. We don't need a teacher. We don't need a doctor. We don't need an authority, a governor. anybody to get information any longer. We can get information because of technology and because of that people are informed, but it's not enough just to know. This is a time in history where it's not enough to know. This is a time in history to know how. So when you get people starting to apply and personalize these principles as they start to demonstrate them, they prove to themselves that they have within their reach all the tools to begin to live a more happy and healthy life. And that information is then released into that holographic field, the unified field, and now it's more readily accessible for the next person to connect to it as well. And that's how we change the world, just like that.
Yeah, and that's where our answers are going to come from. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to figure this out anymore, but Einstein said we're never going to come up with the solutions from the same level of thinking that created the problems. And without working on ourselves and going up to a higher level of consciousness, we won't make it on this planet. If we keep dealing with the nuts and bolts, trying to make everything, it's so precarious, so broken, so fragile that we've created something that will not sustain itself. So we have to go to a different level.
Well, let's talk about a different level of consciousness, because some people don't even know what that means. If you're conscious of your unconscious thoughts, and you're aware that you judge, you're aware that you think thoughts about other people, or you become conscious that you think, I can't, it's too hard, my life is terrible. You become aware and conscious that you complain and you blame and you make excuses and you feel sorry for yourself and you talk poorly about other people. You start noticing and becoming conscious that you're living in guilt and shame and unworthiness and fear, and you didn't even know that you were living in those states because you were part of the running the program. So the present consciousness that is listening to this show has created the present reality that they're living in. So that in order for them to solve the problems of the life that they're living in, they have to go to a greater level of consciousness, as you're saying. But it doesn't just mean like open your heart, or it doesn't mean just become more aware. It means then to know thyself. Because as you start becoming more conscious of those unconscious states of mind and body, that's the first step out. The first step is the unlearning process. It's not just thinking positively if you're feeling negatively or programmed into negativity. It's the whole package. So then as people begin to light a match in a dark place and they say, I can't stand up for world peace if I'm arguing with my coworker or with my neighbor. I can't stand up for compassion in the world if I'm cutting people off in traffic. It doesn't work that way. It's the first step is with us. So if you're working on yourself and I'm working on myself and everybody's working on themselves, that's enough to raise a level of consciousness that the side effect of that is an open heart, a more coherent brain. The side effect is you're less seduced by the conditions in your outer world because you see the hidden meaning behind all things, because you're not controlled and manipulated because you're no longer in the program. You're no longer asleep. You're no longer being manipulated by emotions, by fear and anger and hostility and prejudice. And lack, and you're beyond that because you've done the work. So the first step is the knowing of self. And as you become more conscious of yourself, that brings you to a greater level of consciousness to see how you created the life that you presently live in from a new level of mind. And if enough people begin to do that, all of a sudden they start resonating at the same frequency. And just like that bike that's balancing, or just like a group of grandfather clocks that all of a sudden over time start resonating in the same rhythm, now you have people's energy all connected. And that kind of emergence in biology creates power in numbers, and that becomes difficult to divide.
Yeah, global coherence is what we're actually after. I know you're on a little bit of a time schedule, but I do want to ask one more question that's sort of a double-edged sword, if you ask me, but it has to do with the telomere testing. If we do this research and let it out, is this going to cause a population problem even more?
I don't think so. I think that back to Einstein's principle, There's a lot of places in the world where people don't live. There's a lot of land. There's a lot of water in the earth. It's just that you don't have to live in a city. There's plenty of room to grow vegetables. There's plenty of room for us to live cooperatively. We're measuring gene expression and telomere changes, and it's not for everybody. I don't think it's for everybody. I think there's a strong intellectual division going on in the world right now. Some people are clinging to the old models because that's what they believe in. But many people are starting to realize that there's more to themselves than they're aware of, and I think that kind of courage and that kind of individuality is what begins to change human consciousness. And I'm not worried about that, because I think that once we wake up more, I think we have all kinds of genius possibilities that we could never understand. And Buckminster Fuller said it really well. If you want to change a culture, don't try to change that culture. Just create something greater. And everybody will leave that culture and go to something else. And not everybody will leave, but many people will. And I'm not worried about that. I'll worry about it when I get there. I think I'm not concerned about it. I think there's many more possibilities that we haven't explored as we wake up from the program.
Well, definitely. It seems like most of our answers are slightly over the horizon. So we just have to keep on going and see where this journey takes us.
I think that's the main reason why I wrote Becoming Supernatural, is because I wanted to prove to people that it's possible. I wanted to prove to people that they're not doomed by their genes or hardwired to be a certain way for the rest of their lives. I wanted them to understand they're not victims to the circumstances in the world, that they can change that, and that when you get a group of people together and they all start doing things for each other, I mean, we're the only species in the world that really is fighting with each other and attacking each other and murdering each other. That doesn't go on in many other species. Other species cooperate. They don't compete in that way. I think that this is a very important time in history. And I think that everybody negotiated to be here. So if we negotiated to be here in this crazy, wild, turbulent time, we shouldn't face it with fear. We shouldn't face it with hostility. We shouldn't face it with aggression or victimization or sadness. We should face it with the understanding that something has to die for something greater to be born, and just let the old fall away, and let's build something even better, a new way of being, that everybody can leave the old way and step into a new way. And that's been done throughout history. And that's how we change. Everybody becomes leaders, not just one leader. Right. Everybody leads. And when everybody leads, it's very difficult to control.
Yeah. Well, how would you like to end this conversation, Joe? Because I know you're in a bit of a time schedule right now.
No, listen, I want people to try it out. I want people to take a moment before they start their day and open their heart and begin to connect to a field and surrender their problems and their challenges to a greater mind, and to begin to be defined by a vision of the future, and change their energy and begin to see the effects in their lives of themselves that cause. And when you invest in yourself, you invest in your future. And a little time out of your busy day to close your eyes and disconnect from the outer world, sit your body down and stop it from running a program, and not think about the future or the past, and settle into the present moment, and begin to change your brain and heart, and begin to change your energy. And when you change your energy, you change your life, and do it enough times so that you start seeing those feedback mechanisms in your world. That's the field talking back to you, and it's fun. Don't make it hard, and don't make it difficult. Make it something that's fun, and experiment. Be the scientist in your life, and people are doing it, and learn and study and never stop questioning, and keep building a bigger model of your understanding of the nature of reality. And if you do, I think you'll begin to produce better effects in your life.
Yeah, the subtitle of my radio show is Questioning Our Answers. And the reason for that is because almost every answer I've been given by teachers, preachers, and priests, and parents, and well-meaning adults has turned out to be misleading at best, So the more we can question our answers and look for new answers and have the courage, to really, really be the adventure, not just do the adventure, but be the adventure ourselves. I think we're all going to wake up to a drastically different world. And it could happen in the length of a heartbeat. We don't know how fast this could happen.
Let's hope. And you know what? All the work we're doing could lead to one specific incident, one specific nodal point where everything shifts. And I'm certainly in. I'm all in. I'm going to question everything, and I'm going to keep building a bigger model. And science doesn't have all the answers. Religion doesn't have all the answers. Tradition doesn't have all the answers. We have to keep asking bigger questions and not tiring ourselves until we come up with a greater level of understanding, and keep going on the journey. And certainly there's a lot more to discover.
Show up and don't give up. Okay, well, that was Joe Dispenza, and I think probably it might do all of us good to listen to that interview again sometime. There's a lot of intricacies in there that are built upon that really convey in a language that we don't normally use some of the thoughts and concepts that Joe is talking about. But this got me to thinking too, because Joe is taking us off in a really nice adventure here into being co-creators. And I did an interview with Foster Gamble. So those of you who are privileged enough to stick around for this interview, I've got a surprise for you, because Foster Gamble, he did the documentary Thrive. And listen to what Foster Gamble has to say. And if you haven't seen Thrive, you should see it. But listen to what he has to say about the fact that we are at the turning point, the tipping point, and we need to make a different way for ourselves while we still have resources and a way to do it. And this really brings out exactly what Joe is saying. So now let's listen to hear what Foster Gamble has to say, and I'll be back with you right after this. Okay, Foster, I appreciate you taking your time to do this interview.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here with you. I appreciate your taking the time as well and giving me an opportunity to speak with your community.
Well, this is an important subject that we're on, because I think we talked briefly about the importance of technology, which actually brings up an important point for me, because I'm not too sure that we have enough left of the old system that it will correct itself, which tells me that a conscious and deliberate dismantling of some of the old paradigms might be more important than we think, while we still have some infrastructure left, like the internet, for instance. Because it seems to me if we drive this thing to the ultimate end, we're either going to live in a police state, or we're going to completely wipe out civilization as we know it, and then building back from a grassroots point is going to be really tough. So it seems like it would be better to really take control of this situation. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I agree with you that we're really at a critical fork in the road, as I mentioned in the movie Thrive, that if we keep going the direction we're going, it's only going to get more constricted as the powers that be assume more control over people's lives. And with current technologies, there's the capability of controlling people in a way that, tyrants of the past have always dreamt of, but never been able to actually accomplish. I must say right now, I'm actually more optimistic than I've been in the last 10 years, any time, with the kind of emergence of consciousness and responsibility and information, the type of information that you bring out, the type of information that we're trying to bring out, so that people can actually begin to get an accurate assessment of their reality. I was a martial artist for many years. I trained and taught in the martial art of Aikido for 15 years, and I also did karate and Tai Chi. And I know from the martial arts experience that the number one imperative of protecting yourself and your loved ones is an accurate assessment of your reality. So it's uncomfortable for a lot of people, as it was for me, continues to be for me, to be facing a lot of the domination agendas that we're facing and the truly destructive intent. You know, you and I don't wake up in the morning thinking, how can we control everybody else's life? But unless we realize that there are people who do that, we won't have responses that are really commensurate to the predicament that we're in. So with a combination of the I would say, a spiritual and activist emergence that I see going on all over the world, and the fact that we still have the internet open to communicate with each other, the information and best practices, and to brainstorm strategies together on a global scale. And then with the type of courage that I'm seeing with so many people in the Occupy movement and other activist movements all over the world, we're really in the first global revolution in history. And, you know, the jury's still out as to how successful it will be, and the conversations are going on all over the world as to what are the guiding principles. What are we actually looking to replace a current destructive system with? But I'm very excited about the way those conversations are starting to go, and just about the emergence of the incredible power and beauty of the human spirit that I'm seeing everywhere. And if that continues, and I think we can continue that, then I actually think within the next decade or two, we can tip this thing. We can actually go through the tipping point to where we're turning to take that other road, where we're actually rigorously starting to create relationships, institutions, and so forth that are based on integrity and individual rights, on true justice, rather than on power and accumulation of money, and on fear and domination. So I'm actually feeling quite good about it at the time.
Yeah, when you say tipping point, it brings up a mental image of a scale. And for all of these years, it seems like we've been piling stuff on the scale. We've been having our conversations and our programs and our documentaries, but it's only here recently that I've seen the scale start to move. And that's what happens. You know, you don't think your actions are adding to anything until you reach that tipping point, and then every little thing you add sort of brings it into balance. And it seems like that's the point we're at right now.
I think that's happening too. I see it as the world as a super saturated solution right now, and the drops are going in now that are already creating just a global surge, really a geometric ascent in the movement toward justice, toward harmony with our environment, and toward economic integrity. And I know that you've done a lot of work, which I admire, on really being willing to stand back and look at our belief systems. And I think there's nothing more critical that we can do, because unless you realize that you are operating from a worldview, as is everyone else, you will just unconsciously come up with the results of that worldview. And certainly, I would say the most humbling part of my path over the last 40 years of research is to come to the realization again and again and again that virtually everything I thought I knew about the world we're living in turned out to be not true.
Right.
And building the skill to humbly recognize, oh, I thought this, but it turns out that, is, I think, one of the key skills. And I appreciate your work in encouraging people to learn to get good at that, and to realize that your world doesn't fall apart when your old worldview is replaced by a new one.
Yeah, my wife and I, we had dinner with David Icke 3 or 4 months ago, and we started talking about how belief systems, by their very nature, divide us. And due to the cognitive processing of our minds, we see the world not as it is, but as we are. And when I started dismantling beliefs that were indoctrinated into me since I was a little child, it was, at first it was a little bit scary, because I felt my aloneness, my separateness with no support system. But something really sort of amazing happens when you really break down those filters. You start seeing the world more closely as it is. But even now, talking to you, I feel something in my chest area when we're talking about certain thoughts that I couldn't feel before, because it wasn't part of my belief system, and this is part of my experience, which is a total different thing. And I think as we go on, we're going to have to look at these things, because I know when I wrote my book, it was, where did these belief systems come from? And it sounds like you went through the same thing. When you start tracing everything back, it leads into, at some point, these beings came down from the sky all over the planet and sort of helped us in our previous civilization. So I think, and this is a big one for people to handle, and I really admire you for bringing this up, because when I wrote my book on the social and neurological consequences of belief systems, I really hesitated putting the ET information in there, because I felt like it would invalidate the hard science behind what I was saying. But it's time that we start acknowledging this, at least the strong possibility that we have been influenced, we are being influenced, and we're probably being prepared. I mean, from the crop circles and everything, it seems like they want to make contact as soon as we can get ready.
Well, we have a quote in our film that says, when an honest man discovers he's mistaken, he either ceases to be honest, he either ceases to be mistaken, or he ceases to be honest.
Right.
And we're all being called to go through many moments of exactly that, of asking ourselves, is it more important for me in this moment to hold on to my past beliefs, to look good, to try to convince somebody that I'm right, or to actually know the truth? And I think that it's the evolutionary imperative for humanity right now to actually wake up and realize, as I also say in the movie, that we're not a mistake. We're simply mistaken. We have been intentionally duped by the powers that be for a long, long time. I mean, the central banking system, the whole fractional reserve system alone, has essentially been kept secret from most of us for 400 years. That's humbling. But now we've got the media where people can, like you and I, can be in conversation with each other very easily without having to own a TV station. And so people are starting to get the information that may be uncomfortable, but it's, as my wife says in the movie, it's like knowing that it's like finding out that you've got a dangerous but treatable disease. You can either ignore the knowledge, or if you accept the fact, then you can go and look to see, well, what might be able to cure it. And that's really the choice point for every one of us right now.
Yeah, I like what you said about the alternative energy when you were showing the picture. You said, I don't expect this to convince you, you know, and that's really important, that people have their own experience, you know, to weigh all the facts. But what was it about that really convinced you? Just the actually seeing it?
So for 40 years, I've been studying physics and cosmology and spatial geometry, and it led me into this realization of this fundamental patterning. And as I began to work with some of the scientists who were also aware of the basic nature of this toroidal flow, this torus vortex, they began introducing me to some of their friends who were inventors, who were accessing energy in very unusual ways, not in according to any laws that I had been taught in my traditional physics training. And as I went around to these laboratories, sometimes I had physicists with me, sometimes engineers, sometimes on my own. My wife visited a couple of labs with me, and again, we would see these devices working. We could check and see that there weren't wires or batteries or microwaves. When I remember standing in one lab with my wife when we saw this, several devices actually working, and we looked at each other, and just tears came to our eyes.
So that was Oster Gamble. He did the documentary Thrive, and the first part of this show was with Joe Dispenza. Now, if you want to see the article with Joe Dispenza, you can pick up a copy of your Lotus Guide the beginning of next year, January, February, March issue. We're going to feature him in the Lotus Guide. And you can also read that online at www.thelotusguide.com. And please remember that this show is a nonprofit endeavor on our part, so any contributions are tax deductible because we are a nonprofit organization, and you can make those nonprofit donations at www.spiritualactivist.com. And so stay tuned for some more exciting interviews with exciting people. I have Michael Tellinger coming up here pretty soon, and I had so many requests about Timothy Freak. I did another interview with Timothy Freak on his new book, Soul Stories. He's a dear friend, and he's really, really good at making you laugh about some very serious situations that we normally kill each other over. So, until then, I'll see you in a couple of weeks, and carry on.